Hello, my friends. I am Damien Tao. Welcome back to the darkness. Tonight, Netherwave radio drifts across oceans to the land where the dead never truly leave, and the living walk carefully on borrowed time. I have prepared two tales for you this evening. Both were whispered to me from the forgotten corners of the East. Both happened on the same soil our ancestors once feared to tread after dark. You see, in Chinese tradition, there is a day the 15th of the 7th lunar month. In the West, you might call it a harvest festival, but in China, they call it the ghost festival, the day when the gates between the living and the dead swing open. On this night, the boundary between Funyun and Yang, the world of the dead and the world of the living, grows thin. So thin, they say, that the departed can slip through to visit, to watch, to settle old debts. But sometimes, my friends, the accounts between the living and the dead are not so easily balanced. The first story is called Thiciti the Settling. It begins with a man named Old Guo, a diviner, not a fortune teller who reads palms for loose change, but a true practitioner of the ancient arts. A man who speaks to things that do not speak back. One humid afternoon, his telephone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a taxi driver, a man who called himself Lin. Sir, the voice trembled. Something happened to me, something I cannot explain. Please, can we meet? Old Guo listened. He had heard fear before the real kind, not the theatrical gasps of those seeking entertainment. This man's voice shook like leaves in a dead wind. They agreed to meet at the Peninsula Cafe. After hanging up, Old Guo reached for his oracle bones, ancient turtle shells used for divination since before written history. He cast a reading, but the answer that came back was clouded, unclear, as if something was deliberately hiding the truth from him. As dusk approached, Old Guo descended from his apartment. The streets of the city were emptying. The summer heat of the 7th lunar month pressed down like a damp cloth over the face. He hailed a taxi at the corner. A yellow cab pulled up, and the driver glanced back at him through the rearview mirror. Where to? The driver asked. Old Guo gave the address. The car pulled into traffic, and the driver began to talk as taxi drivers do. Sir, the driver said, I wasn't going to pick you up actually, but when you said Peninsula, well, that is where I'm headed to. I have an appointment there with a fortune teller. Old Guo studied the man through the mirror. Your name is Lin, isn't it? The driver nearly swerved. How did you know? You're the diviner I called, not a fortune teller. Old Guo corrected him gently. A diviner, there is a difference. Driver Lin exhaled slowly, relieved yet still rattled. I'm sorry, sir. I don't know much about your profession. The taxi rolled through the darkening streets as Lin began to remember. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon the memory into the car with them. It happened a few nights ago, Lin said. I was working the night shift, like always. Midnight was approaching. I had just dropped off my last passenger. The city was dead quiet. I was heading home through one of those old urban villages. You know the kind. The places the developers haven't torn down yet, where the old ways still linger. Now, my friends, let me explain something. In Chinese culture, when someone dies, their spirit needs money in the afterlife, just as we need it here. So families burn joss, paper, what we call spirit currency, sending wealth to the dead through smoke and flame. During Ghost Month, this practice intensifies. Every street corner becomes an altar, every curb a furnace for the dead. As I drove through, Lin continued, I saw someone burning spirit money by the roadside. The fire was dancing in the darkness, lighting up their face. Superstitious nonsense, Lin muttered to himself that night, pressing harder on the gas pedal. He just wanted to get home to end the long shift. But fate, my friends, does not appreciate being dismissed. Just then, 2 pieces of spirit money came fluttering through his open window. They flew in from the night air and stuck directly to his face. Lin jerked back in shock. He clawed at his face, ripping the paper away and throwing it out the window. But the damage was done. Cold dread settled into his bones. Sweat broke out across his back, the kind that has nothing to do with summer heat. You see, in Chinese belief, when spirit money touches you uninvited, especially during Ghost Month, it means something from the other side has noticed you, has marked you ahead. Lin could see the intersection, the only traffic light in the entire village, a crossroads. And in Chinese folklore, crossroads are dangerous places, places where worlds intersect. Lin had passed through here dozens of times. The light was green. Perfect. He pressed the accelerator, eager to escape this unsettling place. And then she appeared. An old woman, standing in the middle of the zebra crossing, hunched over a wooden cane, trembling with each impossibly slow step. Lin slammed the brakes. The taxi screamed to a halt, stopping just inches from the painted lines. His heart hammered against his ribs. His palms were slick with sweat against the steering wheel. The old woman continued her glacial pace. One step, then another, moving like time itself had forgotten how to flow. Lin wiped the cold sweat from his brow and waited. What else could he do? Then his phone rang shrill and sudden in the silence. It was his partner, asking where he was. They were supposed to switch shifts. "Sorry, brother," Lin said into the phone, his voice strained. "Something came up. I'll be there soon." He hung up and looked back at the road. The old woman was still there, still crawling forward, as if deliberately testing the limits of his patience. Minutes passed. Each second stretched into eternity. Lin's frustration boiled over. He pressed the horn. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound tore through the empty night like a wound. The old woman didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the sound. "Hey, old lady," Lin shouted out his window. "Can you hurry up? I'm in a rush here." His voice echoed down the empty street, and still there was no response. Then, slowly, impossibly slowly, the old woman turned her head. Her voice came out like gravel scraping against bone, like a crow choking on its own cry. "Yoon, man," she rasped, "don't be in such a hurry. I am old. I must walk slowly." And when Lin saw her face, his heart stopped dead in his chest. Only half of her face existed. The left side was that of an ordinary grandmother, wrinkled, pale, ancient. But the right side was a ruin, flesh hanging in strips, bone exposed beneath rotted muscle, and an eye socket empty yet somehow still watching. Lin could not move, could not breathe. His body had become stone, frozen behind the wheel of his cab while something from a nightmare stood illuminated in his headlights. Then movement from the side of the road. A little girl emerged from the darkness, no older than 8 or 9. Where she came from at this hour, Lin could not imagine. The child walked straight up to the old woman, without hesitation, without fear. She took the old woman's arm gently, the arm connected to the ruined half of her face, and began to guide her across the remaining distance of the crosswalk. The old woman's voice changed, softer now almost. "Grateful. I have waited so long," she said. "So many nights. You are the first person to help me, the first kind soul." The little girl said nothing. She simply held the old woman's arm and walked. "So there really are good people in this world," the old woman whispered. "Old woman that I am, I can finally accept my fate." Her voice carried something Lin had not heard before. Relief, the sound of a burden being set down after carrying it across years, across decades, across the boundary of death itself. You see, my friends, in Chinese belief, some ghosts are not malevolent. They are simply trapped, bound to the earth by unfinished business, an unpaid debt, an undelivered message, or simply the need to know that kindness still exists in the world they left behind. This is what we call Suvi Yuyen, the settling. When a ghost's grievance is finally resolved, they can move on. But if no one helps them, they wander forever. The old woman thanked the little girl one final time, and then where she stood, a whirlwind erupted. Spirit money, the same currency meant for the dead, rose from the ground in a spiral. It danced around the old woman like a cocoon of flame-kissed paper, spinning faster and faster. The little girl closed her eyes against the wind. When she opened them again, the old woman was gone, vanished completely, as if she had never existed at all. The little girl stood alone in the intersection, confusion painted across her innocent face. She looked left, she looked right. The old woman she had helped was simply not there anymore. Lin watched all of this from behind his windshield. Every moment, every impossible detail. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Cold sweat poured down his face like rain. He sat there frozen, long after the little girl had wandered away in confusion. His mind played that rotting face on repeat, the exposed bone, the hollow eye, the voice like gravel and death. He had forgotten how to drive, how to move, how to exist in a world where what he just saw was possible. Lin's voice cracked as he finished telling the story in Old Guo's taxi. So that is why I called you. That is why I needed to meet. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what it means. Old Guo was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. What you witnessed, he said, was a settling. That woman died with a grievance, perhaps in an accident at that very crossing. She needed to know that someone would stop for her, that someone would show her basic human kindness. You honked at her, you shouted, you showed her the worst of the living world. But that little girl, she showed her something else, something that allowed her spirit to finally rest. Lin gripped the wheel tighter. So she is gone now, really gone. Yes, Old Guo replied. Her debt to this world and its debt to her has been paid. She will not return to that crossroads. The taxi pulled up to the Peninsula Cafe. Both men sat in silence for a moment before Lin finally spoke. What should I do now? How do I forget something like that? Old Guo opened the door and stepped out. He looked back at Lin one final time. You don't forget, he said simply. You remember, and next time you see someone who needs help, perhaps an old woman crossing the road, perhaps anyone at all, you stop. You wait. You show them the kindness that might settle their spirit before they become the kind that wanders forever. He closed the door and walked into the cafe, leaving Lin alone with his thoughts and his new understanding of what lurks at the crossroads after midnight. That, my friends, was Sippy the Settling, a ghost story with a gentle ending, if such a thing exists. But now I must take you somewhere darker. Our second tale does not end with resolution. It ends with a truth so terrible that the man who discovered it will never sleep soundly again. This story is called CB the Collectors. Welcome back to the darkness, my friends. I am still here, Damien Tao, and the night is far from over. Our second story takes us away from the city, away from taxis and traffic lights, deep into the Chinese countryside, to a village where the old ways have never truly died. In places like this, my friends, people still respect the night. They know what walks the roads after the sun falls. They know what happens to those who wander too far from home when the moon hides its face. There lived in this village a man named Old Wang, a farmer in his 50s, weathered by decades of sun and soil. A simple man who believed in hard work and strong drink. One evening, Old Wang attended a gathering at his friend's house. The kind of gathering that happens in villages everywhere, men sitting around a table, sharing stories and faiju, that potent Chinese liquor that burns like fire down the throat. The hours slipped away unnoticed. When Old Wang finally stepped outside, he realized with a start that it was well past midnight. The village had gone completely dark. His wife would be furious or worse, worried sick. Old Wang climbed onto his bicycle, the alcohol warming his blood against the cool night air, and began the journey home. The road between his friend's house and his own was not long, perhaps 2 kilometers through the fields, a path he had traveled hundreds of times. But tonight, my friends, that familiar road would lead Old Wang somewhere he had never been before, somewhere no living person should ever go. As he pedaled through the darkness, Old Wang noticed something strange ahead. A light, faint at first, but growing brighter with each turn of his wheels. Not the electric light of a flashlight or a vehicle. This was something older, something that flickered and danced like flame captured in paper. A lantern. And then another, and another, a procession of lights moving slowly across the field ahead, perpendicular to Old Wang's path. Now, in Chinese tradition, paper lanterns are more than simple lights. They are guides used during festivals to lead the spirits of ancestors home. But they are also used in funerals to light the path of the dead to the underworld. Old Wang should have turned around. He should have pedaled back to his friend's house and waited until dawn. Any villager with sense would have done exactly that. But the alcohol had made him curious. And curiosity, my friends, is the most dangerous thing you can carry into the night. Old Wang stopped his bicycle and squinted at the procession. Who would be walking through the fields at this hour? Perhaps it was a funeral party, though funerals were never held at night, and certainly never in the middle of nowhere. He decided to get closer, just close enough to see what was happening. Then he would continue home and tell his wife about the strange sight. As Old Wang approached, the details of the procession became clearer, and his blood began to chill despite the liquor. At the front of the line walked a figure in ancient robes, not the clothing of any modern villager, but garments that belonged to a century long dead. In one hand, this figure held a paper lantern. In the other, a long rope. A red rope. Now I must explain, my friends. In Chinese folklore, red is the color of many things: fortune, celebration, marriage. But it is also the color of binding, of capture. A red rope tied around someone's wrist means they belong to the person holding the other end. And in the realm of the dead, a red rope around the neck means something far worse. It means your soul has been claimed. Your time in the world of the living has ended. Behind the lantern bearer walked others, a line of people, men and women, young and old, shuffling forward with their heads bowed. And around each of their necks was tied that same crimson cord, connecting them all in a chain of the damned. Old Wang's heart began to pound. He crouched behind a low stone wall at the edge of the field, watching the procession pass no more than 20 meters away. The figures in the line did not speak, did not look up. They simply walked, as if in a trance, following the lantern bearer towards some destination Old Wang could not see. And then Old Wang saw a face he recognized. Third from the end of the line, a man shuffling along like the others, red rope tight around his throat. It was Madakuki, a neighbor, a friend. A man Old Wang had shared drinks with just last week. But Madakui was alive. Old Wang had seen him in the village just yesterday, healthy and strong as ever. Old Wang's mind reeled. What was his neighbor doing in this procession of the dead? Was he dreaming? Had the alcohol finally rotted his brain? Before he could stop himself, Old Wang called out, "Dakui, Madakui, what are you doing?" The procession stopped. Every figure in the line went rigid. The lantern bearer at the front slowly turned around, and Old Wang saw that where a face should be, there was only shadow beneath the ancient hood. Then the figure began walking toward him. Old Wang's legs turned to water. He wanted to run, but his body would not obey. He could only watch as the lantern bearer closed the distance between them. The figure stopped an arm's length away. This close, Old Wang could see details he wished he had never witnessed. The way the robe seemed to move without wind. The way the darkness inside the hood was was not simply shadow, but an absence of everything. And then, from somewhere within that void, came a voice. Not spoken, old Wang heard it inside his skull, resonating through his bones. "You see us," the voice said. Not angry, not threatening, simply stating a fact. Old Wang could not speak. His tongue had become a dead thing in his mouth. The lantern bearer raised one sleeve, and from within emerged a length of red rope. It uncoiled in the air like a living thing, like a serpent made of woven blood. Old Wang watched in paralyzed horror as the rope drifted toward him, toward his neck. "This is it," he thought. "This is how I die. Taken by something that should not exist, led away to a place from which no one returns." The rope touched his throat cold, so cold it burned, and began to wind around his neck like a strangling vine. And then old Wang's bladder released. Pure, primal terror overwhelmed everything else. The dignity of a grown man meant nothing. Pride meant nothing. There was only animal fear, and the body's most basic response to absolute horror. The lantern bearer recoiled. The red rope fell away from old Wang's neck as if it had been burned. It retreated back into the figure's sleeve, writhing as it went. "You see, my friends, in Chinese folk belief, the things of death, spirits, the collectors, the demons, they cannot abide the raw essence of the living. And there is nothing more raw, more viscerally alive than the bodily emissions of a terrified human being. The yang energy, the life force contained in such a moment, is anathema to creatures of Funyin, of death, of the underworld. It burns them like holy water burns vampires in Western legends." The lantern bearer hissed, a sound like steam escaping from hell itself, and turned away. The procession began to move again, continuing toward wherever the dead must go. But before it left completely, old Wang saw something that carved itself into his memory forever. At the end of the procession, where Madakui walked in his trance, there was now something else. A hole hovering in the air itself, a vertical wound in reality, glowing with a sick, pale light. One by one, the bound souls stepped through that hole and vanished. Madakui was the last. Just before he stepped through, he raised his head slightly, and his eyes met old Wang's across the darkness. There was no recognition in those eyes. No plea for help, only emptiness, the emptiness of a man whose soul had already been collected, whose body simply hadn't caught up with the truth yet. Madakui stepped through the hole, and then the portal closed behind him, sealing like a wound healing in reverse, leaving nothing but darkness and silence in the empty field. Old Wang knelt there in the dirt, in his own shame for a long time. He did not know if minutes passed or hours. When he finally found the strength to stand, his legs barely held him. He stumbled to his bicycle. The ride home was a blur of darkness and terror, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a collector coming back to finish the job. When old Wang burst through his front door, his wife nearly screamed. He was pale as death, covered in dirt, and worse, shaking so badly he could barely stand. "What happened to you?" she demanded, rushing to catch him as he collapsed onto the bed. "Did you have an accident? Are you hurt?" Old Wang could not answer. Every time he opened his mouth, he saw that faceless hood, that reaching rope, those empty eyes of his neighbor. He finally managed one word. "Spirits." His wife's face went pale. "Spirits? What do you mean, spirits? You're not making sense." "I saw them," old Wang whispered. "The collectors, the ones who take people when their time has come. I saw Madakui with them. They tried to take me too." His wife did not know what to say. She pressed her hand to his forehead, perhaps hoping for fever. An explanation that made sense in the world she understood. "You've been drinking," she said, but her voice wavered. "You had too much, Baiju. It was a nightmare, that is all." "It was not a nightmare." Old Wang's voice cracked. "I touched the rope. I felt it on my neck, cold. So cold." His wife made a decision. "Wait here. I'm going to get Third Aunt." Now, Third Aunt was a figure of respect in the village, a woman of great age who was said to have certain gifts. The ability to see things others could not. To understand the workings of the spirit world. When Third Aunt arrived, dawn was still hours away. She was a thin, white-haired woman with eyes that seemed to look through walls and into tomorrow. She sat beside old Wang's bed and studied his face, touched his forehead, examined his eyes. Then she frowned deeply. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice was calm but carried authority. "Every detail. Leave nothing out." Old Wang recounted the entire experience. The lanterns, the robed figure, the line of bound souls, Madakuti among them. The rope that touched his neck, his shameful salvation. When he finished, the room was silent. Old Wang's wife stood frozen by the door. Third Aunt sat motionless, her ancient face unreadable. "When I was young," Third Aunt finally spoke, "I heard the elders speak of this. The ones who carry lanterns, they are collectors. Soul collectors. They come for those whose time in this world has ended." Collectors. Old Wang's wife whispered the word like a curse. "Yes, those bound by the red rope, their lifespan has been used up. The collectors come to take them to the other side. The doorway your husband saw, that is the passage to the underworld. Once someone passes through, they can never return." Old Wang felt his blood turn to ice water. "But I escaped. I'm still here." Third Aunt surprised them both by laughing a dry, humorless sound. "Your fate was not to die tonight. The collectors saw you, yes, they tried to take you, but you were not meant for them." "Then how did I escape? The rope was already around my neck." Third Aunt's eyes gleamed with something like dark humor. "That urination of yours, it saved your life." Old Wang felt his face burn with shame. His wife covered her mouth. "Don't be embarrassed," Third Aunt continued. "The creatures of the underworld cannot stand the life force of the living, especially in its rawest forms. Your fear was so great that your body reacted without thought. That raw living energy drove the collector back. It dispersed the binding power of the rope. So my cowardice saved me," Old Wang said bitterly. "Your humanity saved you," Third Aunt corrected. "Being alive, truly, completely alive, is the only protection against such things. Remember that." Then her expression darkened. "But there is something else you must know. You said you saw Madakui in that line." Old Wang nodded. "Yes, I'm certain it was him. If you saw him among the collected souls, then his time in this world is ending, if it has not ended already. When the collectors take someone's soul, the body may continue for a while, days, sometimes hours, but death will come. It always does." Old Wang's wife gripped the doorframe. "Madakui, but he is healthy. He is strong. I saw him just yesterday in the market." Third Aunt rose slowly from her seat. "What I tell you is what I know. The collectors do not make mistakes. If they took his soul, his body will follow soon enough." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You must rest now. Recover your strength, and when you can walk again, stay out of the dark. If you see anyone carrying a lantern at night, walk the other way. Do not look, do not speak, do not follow. Some paths once walked can never be unwalked. You were lucky tonight. Do not test that luck again." And with that, Third Aunt disappeared into the night, leaving Old Wang and his wife alone with the terrible knowledge of what he had witnessed. Old Wang lay in bed for the next 3 days, unable to eat, barely able to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that faceless hood, that reaching rope. Madakui's empty stare. His wife kept the news from him at first. She thought he was too weak, too fragile, but rumors travel fast in small villages. On the third morning, word came to their door. Madakui was dead. He had been walking to the market town the same road he had walked 100 times before, when a truck came around a blind curve. The driver couldn't stop in time. Madakuti died on impact. When Old Wang heard the news, he did not cry. He did not speak. He simply sat there, staring at the wall, understanding a truth that no living person should ever have to know. Third Aunt was right. He finally whispered. They really did take him. The accident was just The ending, his soul was already gone. His wife wept, but old Wang could not. His tears had dried up somewhere in that dark field, watching his neighbor march into oblivion. At Madakui's funeral, the whole village gathered. Old Wang stood at the back of the crowd, watching the coffin being lowered into the earth. He knew something no one else there knew. He had seen Madakuki take his last true steps, not on that road to market, but in a field in the dead of night, following a lantern into a hole in the world. The body in that coffin was just an echo. The man was already gone. From that day forward, Old Wang was a changed man. He never walked the roads after dark again. Before the sun touched the horizon, he was home door locked, windows shuttered, waiting for the safety of dawn. He stopped drinking entirely. No more gatherings with friends that stretched past midnight. No more stumbling home through the darkness. His sobriety became absolute, driven not by virtue but by pure, primal fear. Life is more precious than anything, he would say when people asked why he had changed so dramatically. More precious than company, more precious than drink, more precious than curiosity. But he never told anyone the full truth. Who would believe him? Who would understand? Sometimes, in the deep of night, Old Wang would wake from dreams he could not escape. Dreams of lanterns bobbing in the darkness, of red ropes reaching, of the empty eyes of the collected staring back at him from an endless line. He would touch his neck every time, making sure the rope was not there, making sure he was still alive, still uncollected. And then he would lie back down, staring at the ceiling until dawn, breathing slowly, reminding himself that he had been spared. Spared by his own terror, saved by his own shame. A man who lived because, in his worst moment, his body had been more honest than his courage. The villagers still speak of Madakui sometimes. Such a sudden thing, they say. A healthy man taken like that. Life is so fragile. Whenever Old Wang hears these conversations, he says nothing. He only nods and walks away, because he knows something the others do not. Madakui's death was not sudden at all. It had been decided long before that truck came around the curve. His soul had already been collected. His name had already been crossed off the ledger of the living. The accident was just paperwork, the formality of ending what had already been taken. And somewhere out there, in the space between worlds, Madakui's soul walks still following a lantern through eternal darkness, bound by a red rope he can never remove. And so, my friends, we arrive at the end of our journey together. Two stories from the land where the dead never truly leave. Two warnings dressed in the clothes of folklore. The first tale taught us about Chuji-yu and the settling, about ghosts who linger not because they wish to harm, but because they carry a wound that was never healed. A debt that was never paid. That old woman at the crossroads, she had been waiting for years, perhaps decades, for someone to show her the simple kindness she was denied in life, or perhaps in death. Driver Lin had honked his horn, had shouted in frustration, had shown her the worst of the living world, the impatience, the selfishness, the blindness to suffering that plagues us all. But a child, a little girl with no fear and no agenda, had simply reached out her hand, had offered help without being asked. And in that moment, a grievance older than her years was finally resolved. Remember this, my friends. The dead do not always want vengeance. Sometimes they simply want to be seen, to be acknowledged, to know that the world they left behind still contains goodness. The next time you pass someone struggling, an old person crossing the road, a stranger who needs help, do not look away. Do not honk your horn and demand they move faster. You never know who among us is waiting to be settled. You never know whose peace depends on your kindness. The second tale was darker. There was no resolution for Old Wang, only survival. Only the terrible knowledge of what walks the roads when we are foolish enough to wander them after midnight. The collectors. The lantern bearers. Whatever name you give them, they exist in the folklore of every culture, those who come when our time is finished, to lead us across the threshold we must all eventually cross. In the West, you might call them reapers, angels of death, psychopomps, guides of souls. In China, they are the servants of Funyan Luo Wang, the king of hell, who keeps the ledger of every living soul and knows the exact moment each name will be crossed out. Old Wang saw them. He should not have. Living eyes are not meant to witness such things. And yet, because of his curiosity, because of the alcohol in his blood, because fate has a cruel sense of humor, he stumbled into their procession. He saw his neighbor among the collected, saw him walking with the rope around his neck, eyes empty, soul already claimed. And 3 days later, Madakui's body caught up with the truth his spirit already knew. What saved old Wang? Not courage, not cleverness, not prayers or talismans or the intervention of gods. No, he was saved by fear, by the raw, uncontrollable terror that seized his body and reminded the collectors that he was still achingly, embarrassingly, beautifully alive. There is a lesson in that, my friends, a strange and uncomfortable lesson. Sometimes our weakness is our strength. Sometimes the things we are ashamed of are the very things that save us. Old Wang lives still, I am told, in that village. He never drinks. He never stays out past dark. He never speaks of what he saw, except perhaps in whispers to his wife on nights when the dreams become too heavy to carry alone. He knows something we do not. He has seen the machinery that awaits us all, and that knowledge has made him treasure every moment of sunlight, every breath of air, every heartbeat that confirms he has not yet been collected. So what do these stories tell us, my friends? What wisdom can we carry from the darkness into the light of day? First, be kind. Not because kindness makes you a good person, though it does, but because you never know whose spirit depends on your compassion. The stranger you help today may be carrying a burden you cannot see. Second, respect the night. I do not mean fear it, though a healthy fear is wise. I mean respect it. Understand that darkness is not simply the absence of light. It is a territory with its own rules, its own inhabitants, its own dangers. Third, cherish your life. Not in a greeting card way, in a visceral, primal way. Your heartbeat, your breath, the warmth of your blood. These are not things to take for granted. They are the only things standing between you and the collectors who wait for us all. In Chinese tradition, the 15th day of the 7th lunar month is called Fuzhongyanjie, the Ghost Festival. On this night, the gates of the underworld open. The dead return to visit. Families burn spirit money and prepare offerings to honor their ancestors. But the wise ones, the ones who truly understand, they stay inside after dark. They do not wander the roads. They do not seek the dead, because on that night, the boundary between worlds is thin enough to tear. And sometimes, my friends, what tears through is not a beloved grandmother come to check on her descendants. Sometimes it is something older, something colder, something that carries a lantern and a rope and a list of names. Perhaps you are listening to this in daylight, and these stories seem like quaint superstitions. Fairy tales from a culture that has not yet learned to dismiss the darkness. But wait until nightfall. Wait until you are alone on an empty road and you see a light in the distance that should not be there. Then tell me these are only stories. Because I have learned in my many years of collecting these tales that the oldest stories are the truest ones. They survive not because they are entertaining, but because they are warnings. Survival guides passed down through generations. Our ancestors knew things we have forgotten. They knew that the world is bigger than what we can see, that death is not an ending but a doorway, that the night has teeth, and sometimes those teeth are hungry. So heed the warnings, my friends. Be kind to strangers. You may be settling a ghost. Stay out of the darkness. You may be avoiding collectors, and treasure every living moment, because one day, your name will appear on their list. Not tonight, perhaps. Not tomorrow, but someday. We all have an appointment with the lantern bearers. The only question is whether we will go peacefully, our affairs settled, our debts paid, our souls at ease, or whether we will be dragged, struggling, into that pale doorway between worlds. Live well, my friends. Love deeply, forgive quickly, and when you pass someone who needs help, stop. Help them. You never know whose eternity depends on that small kindness. The night falls silent once more, but you know where to find me when the darkness calls again. Subscribe, my friends, so Netherwave Radio may reach you the next time the moon bleeds red. Until then, sleep carefully. This has been Damien Tao, and this has been Netherwave Radio. Good night.